Welcome back to this special program from the Pacifica Radio Archives, where we're asking the question, has the elevation of President Barack Obama to the White House redefined the meaning of black power?
Am I black enough for you? Am I black enough for you? Am I black enough for you? Am I black enough for you?
In the final part of the series, we'll explore this question in detail with the panellists from a series of roundtable discussions held at KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, and WPFW in Washington, D.C. in recent months. Right now, we turn our attention to a couple of key concerns raised in the roundtables: race, racism, and leadership. First, here's Amy Allison from KPFA.
We're gonna leave you behind. We gotta move on up 3 by 3. We gotta get rid of poverty. I got to stay black enough for you. I gotta stay black enough for you.
I'm joined by Derica Blackman, award-winning filmmaker and activist with over 20 years' experience organizing African Americans to fight institutional and internalized racism. She's a co-founder of IO Solutions and the Coalition Against Police Executions. Good to have you, Derica.
Thanks for having me.
I'm also joined by Minister Christopher Muhammad, Executive Director of the Nation of Islam School in Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco. He's an environmentalist and an activist. Welcome, Minister.
Thank you.
Also, Mark Bamuthi Joseph, who is an artist and a social commentator, most recently lauded by the Smithsonian Institute as one of America's top innovators in arts and sciences. He currently serves as the artistic director of Youth Speaks and is the lead curator of Life is Living convenings, which celebrate sustainable survival practices and hip-hop culture across the country at lifeisliving.org. Welcome.
Hi, peace.
I want to talk about a very concrete result of the Obama candidacy and now presidency, is that he's surrounded himself with some people in the administration, most notably Attorney General Eric Holder, who's brought up the issue of race and racism. The president himself, and as a candidate, Senator Obama, spoke eloquently on the nuances and the difficulties of dealing with race in America. But the Attorney General Eric Holder spoke on the issue and said that America continues to be a nation of cowards because we don't deal or discuss race. Let's listen to what he had to say a few weeks back.
Though this nation has proudly thought of itself as a ethnic melting pot, in things racial, we have always been, and we, I believe, continue to be, in too many ways, essentially a nation of cowards. Though race-related issues continue to occupy a significant portion of our political discussion, and though there remain many unresolved racial issues in this nation, we, average Americans, simply do not talk enough with each other about things racial.
That's Attorney General Eric Holder. I want to ask Minister Christopher, do you agree that we're a nation of cowards when it comes to race? Because we collectively just elected Barack Obama as president.
Well, I think that the problem of race has always been a problem of white America dealing with its history. The history of America has always been written in blood. It's been written in murder, kidnapping, rape, and all of the things that we would consider ugly. And so to not recognize that history and to gloss over that and then make it politically incorrect to speak on issues of race and not really address the real root causes of why people are in the present condition that they're in allows America to not hold on to its guilt as it relates to the condition of those that are oppressed as a result of being in white America. And I think that's very important if we're understanding why black people are in the condition that we're in, why Latinos are in the condition they're in, why Native Americans are in the condition they're in. Nobody's supposed to talk about that. And if Obama would have talked about that clearly, he would not have been elected president of these United States. But now that he is, Eric Holder is right, and those who are of that same mind are right. Let's put it on the forefront because there are real issues affecting the very soul of this country that you cannot gloss over. And not just talk about race, but deal with how race has affected generationally whole peoples and then begin to make the corrective steps necessary to turn that around.
Well, Bamuti, Minister Christopher brings up a point, which is generationally we've got to use race as a lens. But now we have Barack Obama. Doesn't that make it easier for people of all races to talk about it?
Sure, because it makes it easier because there is a signpost in the presidency of Barack Obama that I think invites folks of all races into a conversation. Now, whether that conversation is a cursory one or whether it involves or leads to widespread transformation is a whole other thing. We talked about the path to leadership being one that is channeled through spirituality. And I think that anyone that undertakes a spiritual path ultimately is moving towards some texture of salvation or transformation. So when, Attorney General Holder speaks about cowardice, I think that it's extreme in language, but also necessary, as a challenge for folks that would not invite themselves into a process of self-reflection which leads to transformation.
You work with young people, though, in Youth Speaks. Is the next younger generation able to talk about race more easily?
Absolutely. And I think that it's not just a product of a multicultural education, but the fact that they themselves, the young folks that I work with, are being taught by products of a multicultural education. So there's something, I think, in the vocabulary which is different, but there's also, the idea of liberatory pedagogy, which we practice at Youth Speaks, and I think that we find evident certainly in President Obama's candidacy, is that you announce yourself. There is self-creation, I think, that is inherent in the word, and by speaking your reality in kind of constructing in poetic forms or in musical forms a kind of liberatory construct that's outside of the mainstream definitions or the mainstream framework for how one should identify oneself. I think that that's what we're seeing is just kind of more self-declared, more independent individuals, and that really, I think, is the path to transformation is in the language.
But I want to ask you about the self-declared identity. Is this that young people of African descent, however you want to define it, don't feel boxed in by a racial label anymore?
I think it's much more class than race. I think that there are all means and all sorts of media really to self-define. Do you
agree with that, Derica Blackman? That there's this great space now in order to define who you are racially in any other way?
Well, yes and no, because what I agree with in terms of what Bamuti is saying is that in my experience, this act of self-definition has always been a part of having more money, right? So Michael Jackson says it doesn't matter if you're black or white. It doesn't matter if you're Michael Jackson.
He's been a range of things.
Right. And so, but at his level of achievement in terms of what's isolated him or insulated him or what he thought insulated him was his money, right? And so at that level of achievement, black people tend to think that they can redefine themselves. They tend to think when they get a certain level of notoriety or a certain level of class establishment. I know plenty of black people of generational excellence that think of themselves sort of outside the norm of what other black people are, and they will make that separation. But do working class folks feel like they can just shrug off blackness? Like it's a thing that they don't have to be defined or constrained by? I don't think it's the same.
Here's Janetta Rose Barris.
At least 2/3 of Americans believe now, since the election of Barack Obama, that the country's race relations are improving. No, we haven't gotten to a place where everybody just loves each other. This is a kumbaya moment and all of that. But the point is that we are moving into a place where we recognize each other's humanity. And I think that's important. So I think that when we raise these kinds of issues where we have these examples of extraordinary anti-human behavior by others in our society, we also have to acknowledge that there are people. We could look at Grant Park, for example, with the election of Barack Obama and see the many faces that were there in Grant Park in Chicago on election night and know that there are black people and white people and brown people all working together. But I also want to say this, that for every case where you see a black person being assaulted by a white person, there are equal number of cases where black people assault white people and assault brown people. And so let's remember that this prejudice that we see is not just owned by white people. Some black people own it, and some brown people own it. It is a nature, it is part of the human nature where you have this kind of prejudice. And it is sad wherever you find it, and it should be assaulted wherever we see it, with just a counteraction of our behavior so that we invite a much more humanistic approach to living with people with different cultures and different peoples.
Somebody. I am. Somebody. I am. God's child. I may not have a job, but I am. Somebody. I may be black, but I am. Somebody.
In a roundtable held at KPFK in Los Angeles, the discussion moved beyond issues surrounding race and racism, but incorporated the concerns of African Americans within the LGBT community. Here's KPFK's Lucia Chappelle.
What are the principal issues or the most pressing issues right now for African American LGBT and same-gender loving people?
You got to ask that question to someone who puts their sexual orientation before their race or who looks through the prism of life as a gay person, because I can't answer that question for you.
Jasmine Canick in Los Angeles.
I have long stopped separating myself from the black community just in terms of saying, okay, well, I'm black lesbian, I'm black this. I'm just black. So the same issues that stop, black people who happen to be gay from going to vote or getting politically involved are just the same issues across the board that stop black people from getting politically involved in the process. In terms of the work that I do, I try not to separate myself from the community. And I'll tell you what, it's because of that I've gotten as far as I've gotten. You have to understand, there are black gay folks who are involved at all levels of government now, who are involved in the community. And it's not that they have to walk into the room waving a rainbow flag and saying, I'm here and I'm gay, whatever. I think that as a community, we just as one voice and one single voice just need to get our act together. I think that time will come when people are desperate. Just think about it, right? You think about the Watts riots, you think about all those periods in history where things just got so bad that we finally just sort of all collectively took action. For me, I'm 31 years old, so the moment that I remember most clearly is the 1992 riots. I remember that because I'm not saying I was involved in any of that. I happened to be around at that time, and I could understand the frustration of the people. I could definitely understand the frustration of young black men living under a Daryl Gates regime here in the city of Los Angeles. I think it is imperative and very important that we love all of who we are, but that as a community, collectively as black people, we don't start singling ourselves out. I mean, I can go to any black church in Los Angeles, and I know there's going to be some brothers and sisters in there that might be singing a little bit louder than everybody else and have a little bit more, pizzazz or whatnot. And the sisters in the church know that, and it's not something that is a huge issue in the church. We're like I said, we're everywhere. We just have to figure out as a community how to realize that other folks' agenda may not necessarily be our agenda, and that when presented with this, and in particularly like an issue like Proposition 8 or an issue around gay marriage, how we can sort of read between the lines and try to figure out as a community, really what is most important at this time and how to not let our buttons be pushed.
You're listening to part 2 of Redefining Black Power in the Age of Obama. I'm Joanne Griffith. Connected to this conversation about race, leadership. Here's Amy Allison from KPFA.
For African Americans thinking about 4 decades ago, and plus Martin Luther King's speech and his movement defined much of our institutions and our self-image for many decades. I want to play 1 minute from the most famous speech that has been reinterpreted by very diverse groups of Americans. Let's listen.
Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
My name is Jordan Monroe. I'm originally from Oakland, California. I'm 26 years old, and I now live in LA area. I am a correspondent for youth radio. I started in youth radio in 1998, and I am also pursuing an undergraduate degree in hydrology, which is water science. I would ask myself time after time on a weekly basis, like, who are the black leaders that I would turn to for questions? And I automatically have to jump to Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, obviously a lot of authors, Cornel West, and a lot of the black intellectuals. But besides that, comparing the 70s and the unity I saw within the black community in the 70s and the 60s, I can't say that there's been any kind of positive move towards empowerment for the people. I mean, I've seen black media kind of decrease in value, and then pops Barack Obama. Where does this come from? This didn't come from no civil action. This didn't come from community organization. This came from essentially white people putting this man in front of us, pretty much. You know what I mean? So I'm not approaching Barack Obama with a racial perspective of black unity. As far as American politics, it's a positive thing for American politics because we're letting black people into the president's office. You know what I mean? If you're into that march for your rights thing, I think I'm more into like of a take it, take what I think I earn. You know what I mean? That's more my perspective. That's more my approach. I look more to the Malcolm mold than the Martin mold.
I think we have to also get back into this conversation, though, about the individual versus the collective. And I think this is where we get hung up a lot of times on these issues, is that while there were individuals who came to be characterized with the movements associated with Black power and Black consciousness, they were movements. And they were about organizing and mobilizing masses of people. It wasn't really just about, I think, one of the things I'm always really critical of in this day and age is that leadership, as Minister Christopher said, is not developed from communities, from the people. You become a leader in this day and age by writing a book. Right? And so you have a book, and now the media follows you around. You have a book tour, and that's how you become I heard Dr. Cornel West is really the first person that made me think about this. I heard him. He was here at East Bay Church, and he said, I'm not a leader. And he was pointing to those of us that were on the stage with him that ran organizations, said, you all are leaders. I'm an intellectual. I'm a thinker. I'm a cultural critic, but I'm not a leader. And it's true. A lot of the people who we consider our leadership don't have any followers other than people who read their books. They don't have any membership. They don't have any base that they build from. And I think that's really a difference in terms of thinking about whether someone is pushing for a collective or whether they're pushing as an individual.
People get ready. There's a train coming. Don't need no baggage. You just get on board.
Hello, my name is Margaret Prescott, host of Sojourner Truth on KPFK in Los Angeles. There was a lot of debate, I must say, among progressives at the time, saying, oh, well, you know, he's not black enough, he's not militant enough, he doesn't really represent, you know, the causes, you know, that we are concerned about in our community, and some disappointment that he didn't represent the black president who was going to be the president of black people, getting back to Kurume's point. And Nana, I wanted to get your reaction.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, so people did. I'm a black nationalist, so that's a perspective that I have in terms of, you know, how I look at the world that comes out of that. And I think that, yes, there are people that are disappointed or were disappointed in that way. And I think it's a fair criticism. I'm one of those people that believes that just because you're black doesn't mean you can't be criticized. So it's like President Obama's black, but he can still be criticized. I think that we have to be careful, though, and this is what I, always caution folks, in that, we have to look at what we want. If we look at the United States, and if as black nationalists, progressives, whatever terminology we use, if we say that the United States is a symbol of imperialism, capitalism, and white supremacy, it's just not really likely that the nationalist person is who's going to be elected, or that you'd want to be elected. If someone offered me the presidency, I wouldn't take it, because I don't want to be in charge of the plantation. I'm not interested. I don't want to replace mass in the plantation, so that's cool. Let President Obama do that if he can do that. I think that it's fair for people to feel disappointed who maybe aren't progressive, but who grew up with the notion that when we put black people in certain positions, the reason we do that is for you to bring us along with you and to bring our issues to the fore. That is what civil rights allegedly is based upon in terms of especially politics, that you're going to look back and you're going to say, oh, I know my people and I know their concerns, and I'm going to raise those concerns. So as Karume points out, when a black person who's going into position of power, and especially the leader of the so-called free world, basically says, let me tell you what I'm not going to do. The one thing I'm not going to do is look behind me and raise up these issues. Then it becomes a concern.
My name is Karume James. I'm a community organizer with the Community Coalition. Now continue organizing in South Los Angeles to involve residents and others in creating change in their communities. The opportunity for this kind of set of forces to happen for an Obama to be relevant at this particular time definitely could not have happened without the civil rights and the Black Power movements, and then the Niagara movement before that, and the abolition movement before that. Every preceding movement that led to him being in this particular position was absolutely critical. I think one of the major reasons why his success actually relied on that was because there was a huge vacuum of black leadership that came after COINTELPRO, and just the all-out assault and dismantling of any possible black leader, particularly a black male leader, which left a huge void for generations. And so in that context, there's not a serious, critically thinking, assertive, conscious or progressive person that's out in the public landscape that's setting the tone, like there was a Malcolm, or there was a Kwame Ture, or Maulana Karenga, or Malcolm X. Any of those folks are not on the public landscape. Well, then you have any black man that comes along saying something besides something that rhymes or something that has to do with a sports statistic, then I think people are going to respond to that. And so I would say that, yes, these movements created the possibility for people to recognize a black male in a leadership position. But without that vacuum, I don't think that you would have had an Obama in that position. You would have had Obama in the rank and file amongst a number of other organizations that are actively organizing, mobilizing around black people's liberation.
Community organizer Karume James there, acknowledging that we couldn't have a President Obama without the struggles of the past. As the saying goes, Rosa sat so that Martin could walk, Martin walked so that President Obama could run, and President Obama ran so our children can fly. In the concluding part of the Redefining Black Power series, we address the question, how does the election of America's first black president redefine the meaning of black power? Does it change anything at all?
I'm not weak.